Once again, welcome to this side event, Protecting Education Systems from the Impact of Climate Change. This event is hosted by the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction Resilience in the Education Sector, GADRRRES. And my name is Inger Ashting. I am the CEO of Save the Children International, and I'm honored and excited to be moderating this panel today. We, Save the Children, are proud to be a long-standing and active member of GADRRRES. So I will just share a few housekeeping notes before we start. For the people in the room, there will be a simultaneous translation into Arabic and French. So those of you who needs that, you can take a headset similar to the one that you see my son having, and then you can hear in Arabic or French. If you're joining us online, unfortunately, that's not the opportunity. You have to listen to it in English. And we have a packed agenda, so there will not be time for Q&A. You can try to catch people as they move out of the room, and if you have questions, you can, of course, use the Q&A in the chat. But the panel will not be able to answer your questions because they are sitting up here, but other people might. So into the content of the event today, we all know that the climate crisis is one of the biggest threats to children's rights. And it is one of the biggest threats to children's rights and access to education. Save the Children launched a report earlier this year, Born into the Climate Crisis, and that highlights that climate and environmental threats are responsible for the disruption in the education of over 37 million children each year. And that is half of the 75 million children and youth who have their educations disrupted due to an emergency or crisis. So this is a huge, huge impact on the education of children. GADRRRES and Save the Children are responding to this major challenge, and together we are supporting governments to scale up their programmatic responses and embed best practice into global policy, most notably into the revised Comprehensive School Safety Framework for 2022 to 2030. So that climate change and its impact on education, what different actors are doing to respond, is what we will use the coming 45 minutes discussing in this panel. I have a group of very distinguished panelists with me. I will not give them long introductions because they will be able to talk a bit more about themselves and what they represent when I give them the word. But just so that you know that the people with me on stage is Charles North, it's Krista Joy Burton, it's David Knaute, it's my son, and Jerry Velasquez. We have one online speaker as well. It's Mark Fancy. You don't see him, but you see his name up there. And we also have a few pre-recorded messages from other speakers. So you will hear from us today. And together, the panelist represents youth who will share who will share her views and her experience of the climate crisis. We will learn a bit more about this CSSF. We will hear statements from countries who have started implementing it, what that looks like. We will hear from some of from the private sector and from some of the biggest funders on both in the education and climate space. So that's what we will cover together today. And I really encourage you, if you don't know much about GADRRRES, that you go on to our website, learn a bit more, and think about how you can support this really, really critical work to support education and most importantly so, ensure that we are collectively addressing the challenges that climate and the climate crisis is putting on an already stretched educational system. So if you can partner with us in that, that would be great. So I often say when I speak that it's really critical to always start by listening to children and youth. And I absolutely believe that, because we are talking about children, we are talking about youth but often we don't do that listening to them. We talk about them, but we don't let them be part of our conversation. So of course, it's natural for me to give the first word to my son.
Good evening to one and all. I'm my son, 17 years old, from Egypt. I stand here before you to give a warm welcome to everyone present here today in Egypt, the country of peace, to take decisions and wake our planet. In the past few years, schools in Egypt have had to close due to heavy rainfall and difficult weather conditions. Roads were blocked, so we were not able to reach our schools. We had to miss important classes and exams. It was sometimes hard for us to catch up with the heavy curriculum. As a child, to know more about the climate change, I had to work on myself to gather information because I did not have enough information. But when I attended with Save the Children and learned new information, that made a huge difference to me and to my point of view of the society. I will talk today with you about the necessity of literacy for climate change. I would like to start off with the kids and the children. The first step should be taken by the Ministry of Education, as we should include the awareness of climate change within the educational curriculum. We should start talking with the kids about biological diversity and its importance, the effect of climate change on tourism, the international agreements that occur every year regarding the climate change. And that's what Egypt started including in the educational curriculum. But we are not here today to talk about Egypt. But the main purpose of our gathering today is to spread the awareness of climate change worldwide. That's why I will follow with you in the upcoming time the strategy of practical education, which is after adding the climate change to the curriculum, we shall start taking the kids to nature reservative places, tourism sites, and let the kids practice recycling of plastics and waste materials and give them full awareness that these waste materials produce CO2 carbon dioxide gas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maysoon. I think you gave us a combination of an understanding of the very high level implications of disrupted education for you and other children and youth around the globe, but also some practical suggestions of how we can do things forward. And I think that's really critical because often in meetings like this, we talk about the problem, which of course we should do, but it is really, really important that we come to the solutions and really start getting to those. That's why I also want to after thanking you, Maysoon, for that powerful testimony, I want to go to you, David. You are the climate change and education consultant at UNESCO, which is the new chair of GADRRRES, and you will, I hope, be able to share a bit more on information about one of the really good tools that we can use. So if you could say a bit more about the revised CSSF and explains its relevance and importance to protect and adapt education systems to cope with the impact of the climate crisis. And I don't know, when I look around me in the room, if you all know what the CSSF is, but I hope after you have listened to David, you will understand what it is and why it is a really, really good tool that we all can hopefully stand behind. So over to you.
Thank you, Inga. So good evening, everyone. So indeed, I will briefly present the Comprehensive School Safety Framework, CSSF, and how it relates to what Maysoon just brilliantly introduced to us. We had a personal testimony, and now we are going to explain how we try to translate it into a strategic framework. So maybe the previous slides, I believe. Yeah, the previous one. Yes. So first of all, warm welcome on behalf of GADRRRES. You can see here written the Global Alliance on Disaster Risk Reduction and resilience in the education sector, which is a global coalition co-chaired by UNESCO and UNICEF, and composed of many members, including UN agencies, but also international organizations such as Save the Children, Plan International, World Vision, among others, as well as different partners such as the World Bank and others. The GADRRRES is a coalition which has created and which is promoting the CSSF. So in brief, the CSSF is nothing new. It has quite already a long history, almost 20 years. And to summarize it, we can say that the CSSF is the contribution of the education sector to disaster risk reduction and / climate change adaptation. So it was initially thought at the time of the adoption of the Hyogo framework for disaster risk reduction, which was adopted in 2005. So many of you in the room are very young and you may not know about the Hyogo framework, but you may have heard about the new version, which is the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which is covering the period 2015-2030. So the CSSF is a tool indeed to implement the Sendai framework within the education sector. The second point, which you can see on the slide, is that the CSSF has long been applied at country level in very concrete ways. Many countries have fully integrated the CSSF into their education plan. So one example, in Pakistan, you have heard of the historical floods in Pakistan this year. Pakistan has already been affected by massive floods over the past decades. In 2011, and I was myself living in Pakistan back then, the whole of Pakistan was also affected by floods. And the response of the Ministry of Education was to, along with UNICEF, to adapt the CSSF to the education system of Pakistan. And so they created the Pakistan School Safety Framework, which is fully aligned with the global framework of the CSSF. The other example which I wanted to highlight is from the Caribbean, and my dear neighbor is from the Caribbean, which has been one of the most proactive regions in the world to build the resilience of education. Why? Because all nations across the Caribbean are hit every year by hurricanes, and every year you have many schools being damaged and destroyed by natural hazards, and students are being, of course, affected by that. So all Caribbean countries got together to initiate the Caribbean School Safety Initiative, which is the Caribbean segment of the CSSF. So you can see that there's a lot happening. That's just two examples, but there are many around the world. And the last point is new opportunities. We are here gathering at COP. We talk a lot about climate finance. More and more, the major climate funds are now supporting the education sector. So we do have already now, over the past 2-3 years, so it's quite recent, we have different projects funded, for instance, by the Adaptation Fund, but also the Green Climate Fund, representing today, which now cover the education sector. So this is really a trend showing that there is more and more recognition of the need to respond to the impact of the climate crisis on education. Next slide. So yeah, so very briefly for all of you to know that the CSSF is a framework made of 4 components. The first one is called the enabling systems and policies. It's saying that we need to support countries to revise their policy frameworks to integrate mainstream climate change, climate resilience into education, and vice versa, integrate education into climate policies. Then the 3 pillars, the first one is on school buildings. safer school infrastructure. And we need to make sure that schools don't get damaged during disasters. The second pillar is about preparedness. We need to make sure that students, teachers are prepared for disasters. And the third one is all about curriculum. We need to make sure that all our youth and students learn about climate change and understand what they can do to respond. And so, yeah, so just in one sense, to say that the CSSF is all hazard framework. It's covering all hazards, not only climate change, but also other natural hazards such as earthquakes, as well as conflict and day-to-day threats to education. But today we are focusing on the first one, which is climate change. And that's just to give you a picture of the broad scope of partners and linkages between CSSF and existing frameworks, such as the Paris Agreement on climate change, as well as the Agenda 2030, the SDGs. So you can see all the partners I was mentioning before, just to say that some of them work from school level, some of them work at a global level. So it's really a teamwork, and it works because we are all together, and we need to be united to build the resilience of education. I think I will conclude here and give the floor back to Inge.
Thank you so much, David, for giving us that overview. And you were referring to your colleague, Krista, who is sitting next to you. And Krista is from the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda. If it would be really great if you can say a few words about how you have been implementing it in your country.
Thank you, Inga.
You have 5 minutes.
I think David took a few minutes. All right. Yeah, so I am from the Department of Environment. I work a lot with project development as well as project coordination for our climate change projects on the ground. But we do work a lot with the Ministry of Education in Antigua and Barbuda as well, who would have worked with the team to develop the different frameworks. So we would have our own model that that is highlighted from the CSSF, and that's to make sure that DRR is included more in the school curriculums, as well as to ensure that when we talk about preparedness, to make sure that schools are more prepared and students who can be more involved in that process, along with the teachers and the persons who have to implement these programs. So from the Department of Environment standpoint, we do work with different ministries to implement our projects. We focus a lot on ensuring that when we look at project development, we include more components that focus on grants, for instance. We think about capacity building, and having grants is a part of that, because then we can provide grants to schools in order for them to purchase more equipment for their schools, for them to develop proposals to actually apply to us for grant funding so that they can have certain programs in place. So that would be building more resilience to the schools, adding renewable energy, that's so that if there is a climate impact, they're able to be more prepared. If the electricity goes off in their school, they'll still have solar panels, they'll have battery backups. And we try to incorporate other aspects. Aside from that, we also try to make sure that we implement more training programs. So we're working a lot with the academic institutions as well in the country, as well as regional academic institutions. So we'll have different frameworks with them. We'll start partnerships to ensure that we can have more training programs for schools. We can build more local experts that are able to have a better understanding of how to implement DRR, how to have more training programs. And from that, we're able to have a bit of a training of trainers approach as well. So the more local experts that we're able to have on the ground, they're able to teach other persons within their own institutions, as well as to teach the local communities. So it kind of stems all the way down to looking at locally led adaptation as well. So we try to incorporate a lot of this. And it kind of stems back to the Paris Agreement, the fact that all of our countries have have made this agreement to improve their ambition in terms of climate actions. And a part of that for Antigua and Barbuda is to look at the just transition, and that would incorporate more training programs, more education for persons. So that's a little bit about what we do to make sure that we have more persons educated and to reduce the impacts on the ground.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I hope that other governments take inspiration from that and do more of the same. And we also heard David saying before that the region that you represent is actually doing much more than many others. So hopefully that can be an inspiration. Governments are, of course, a critical actor, maybe the most critical actor, but governments cannot do this and cannot solve this alone. We need all different actors, all sectors in society. And I'm now turning to you, Charles North. And today the focus is on how education and climate is connected and correlated. And the Global Partnership for Education endorsed the revised CSSF earlier this year. And it would be really interesting to hear a bit more from you about why you are increasing your focus on climate resilience and why this approach is important from your perspective.
Well, thank you. One, two, three. Yes, okay, I'm here. So the Global Partnership for Education is the largest global fund and partnership dedicated to focusing on education in the poorest countries in the world. We currently support 83 countries. Now, we're all about education. We want to see education systems being transformed, so every child is getting the education they need and they deserve. But what's getting in the way? One of the key things that's getting in the way is climate change. Now, think about it. With COVID pandemic, there were 1.6 billion children out of school for some part of that year. We hear a lot about learning losses because of that time out of school. But that was the pandemic. When we think about climate change, children are out of school all the time because of crises, whether it's the floods in Pakistan and Nigeria, whether it's the drought in the Horn of Africa. This is a constant issue affecting so many of the countries that we work in. So for us, if we want to pursue and achieve our objectives in education, we must also be looking at climate change. Now, I was talking to the Minister of Education from Malawi recently, and she said, climate change is like a thief that comes in the night. She said they were hit by 2 cyclones. It destroyed infrastructure, destroyed the schools. They had purchased textbooks, science textbooks, so every child could have a science textbook. All those textbooks were destroyed in the cyclone. Now, it's not like they're sitting on lots of money that they can just go out and buy a whole new set of textbooks. They have now been set back in their ability to provide that kind of education to their children. So what do we need to do? We need to start with, to get that education we need to have school systems that are resilient. And to get that resilience, we and GBE are very much behind this comprehensive school safety framework. We think it is the way to go. We're very proud to be able to champion it in the countries that we work in. Because if we can get that education systems to work, if we can keep the resilience, keep those children in school, they will learn more. They will lives will be saved if we can be resilient. They'll be learning more, they'll get a better education. That better education then comes back to their communities, where they will be able to share that knowledge to those communities that are also more resilient. Now, so what are we actually doing? We are really ramping this up now, looking at climate and education, that combination. But I just have to start, our approach to education is how we're also approaching climate. We take a systems approach. We look at the entire education system And that's how we say, where is the critical part of that education system? If we can address that bottleneck that's holding back the education that we want the children to have, then let's address that and we can get change at scale. So that's the kind of the approach we're taking. In doing that, we have to support countries in doing the analysis of where the risks are, what's not working, how do they move this forward, and help with the planning and the implementation. Is also about analyzing where are the most marginalized children. Where are the children who are not going to get that education? And frequently we're talking about girls. Girls are the ones who are most likely not to get into school. Girls are also most likely to drop out of school earlier. So there is a need to focus on the most marginalized from an education standpoint. But when we look at the most marginalized children, from an education standpoint, we're also probably looking at the most vulnerable to climate change. So there's an opportunity for us to target that set of children who need the support most from both the education side and climate side. We're also now going to be rolling out some collaboration with others to provide technical support to countries on these areas. We're then building on that to find ways to create new partnerships and leverage more resources from other sectors. So looking for those opportunities to build across, between education and climate change, between education and other sectors like food security and so forth. So anyway, this is kind of what we're trying to do. It's a journey. We just had some great conversations with Save the Children and the Green Climate Fund, hoping that goes somewhere. But this is an opportunity for all of us to be working together. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's really exciting to have DP as part of this forward-looking work around the comprehensive school safety. And you were mentioning the Green Climate Fund. And so the next person that I'm going to invite to speak is Jerry Velasquez, who is the Director for Mitigation and Adaptation at the Green Climate Fund. My question to you, Jerry, is how the Green Climate Fund and your partners are looking to play a role to the impact of the climate crisis on children's education. So I think a similar question as I asked Charles, but the other way around. So the education is part of your work in the focus on climate. A mic is coming your way.
Many thanks. And firstly, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting the Green Climate Fund to this event. It's a very important event. And for those of you that don't know about the Green Climate Fund, we are the financial instrument of the Paris Agreement. So we were created specifically to service the Paris Agreement. We are the largest multilateral climate fund. And we are now finishing our first replenishment period. This is our first replenishment, and we are entering a second replenishment. Now, our replenishment period is about 4 years, and we spend about $10 billion within that 4 years, about $2.5 billion per year on projects. And over the course of about 9 years now that we've been investing in projects, we've only had very few projects that deal with education and children. The few projects that we've had, maybe I start off on the ones that are recently approved. Just this recent board that we had in October, we've approved a project from the AFD, which is the French Development Agency, wherein we, in fact, make their bilateral investments in social infrastructure. And this includes hospitals, schools, and housing, social housing, more resilient to climate change and low emission. So our investment is to make their bilateral investments into these infrastructure more resilient to climate change and to also contribute less to climate effects. That's one. We've had a project in Antigua and Barbuda. It's an on-granting, on-lending program wherein it's retrofitting infrastructure. Both, there were some schools, I think there were some hospitals, but mainly it is housing, regular houses. because they were affected by cyclones and they needed retrofitting. And this is one way to actually allow the people to actually fix and strengthen their infrastructure. And I heard that in the recent cyclone that passed through the country, there were less damages to these same infrastructure. So the investment really worked. And of course, we had this project by Save the Children in Vanuatu. One of the largest community-based adaptation programs in the world was in Vanuatu. And it is taking education from a community-based approach. And I think a similar proposal that is under review by Save the Children, I think for Solomon Islands, a similar project. Now, the question really is, how come if there is a framework, comprehensive school safety framework, and you're piloting it in a few countries, how come that is not being proposed to us? That's more a question to you than to me, right? And the other question is that how come we are not focusing more on children? Again, that's a question to you than to me. I would love to have a project that focuses more on children. I would love to have a project that actually takes the comprehensive school safety framework and takes it into the next level, into actual implementation at scale. But focusing maybe on, because of course we're a climate fund, we cannot invest on earthquake protection. We can't do that, but I do realize that most of these interventions are multi-hazard. So one intervention in one area will benefit all the hazards. It's not like, okay, you prepare for climate and you don't prepare for biological hazards. No, you do one, you serve all. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to do this. And I think this is an opportunity for us also to work with GPE. So I think Save the Children, GPE and us will have an opportunity to actually do this. And I look forward to maybe this program by next year. So, so for this, maybe I think most of our colleagues are in the audience. So maybe this is more a call to action on all of us that if this is such a gap in the system, maybe it's about time that we put some attention into this and develop something concrete to address this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry, and thank you for your strong emphasis on education and on children, and also for the call to action, because of course, in order for you as the Green Climate Fund to fund things, that there needs to come good proposals your way. So that's also something that many of us listening on Zoom and maybe some of us in the room as well need to take on, because we need to put the right proposals in front of both of you. And I think it's really encouraging to listen to the GP and the Green Climate Fund, some of the biggest donors in education and climate, talking about how we are able, or you are interested in working more together, and also saying that let's see change next year. So let's make sure that we actually deliver the things that we have discussed here during COP, and make sure that it's not just a talk shop, but actually focused on action. I will see if we can get our next speaker in. We have, I said we will also hear from the private sector. And we have Mark Fancy, who is the Executive Director of Prudence Foundation, with us. And Prudence Foundation has played a key role supporting the comprehensive school safety framework and its implementation in the Philippines, just as one example. And Mark, it would be great if you could tell us a bit about why building resilience in education systems is important for you and your foundation and the comprehensive school safety framework.
Thanks so much, Inga, and I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Apologies, I can't be there in person. It is a privilege to join this panel on such an important and relevant subject. To provide some context, Prudence Foundation is the charitable arm of Prudential, which is a life insurance company. So protecting the well-being, health, financial security of communities, individuals is part of our DNA. And through the foundation, we're really focused on bringing safety and protection to as many communities as possible. And we ideally are looking at sustainable long-term initiatives that are focused around education, health, and safety. So supporting efforts that are focused on building educational resilience and educational continuity, programs and projects that try and make disasters less disastrous are really aligned to our core objectives. So that brought us to the Safe Schools program, which is part of the Comprehensive Safe School Framework. It's really the implementation of that framework, all the way back in 2013. We started off with Plan International and Save the Children, working across 5 different countries, and really on a school-by-school implementation approach, community-based disaster risk reduction, and using the school as the nucleus to do that, and really trying to implement the 3 pillars that David had earlier shared that are part of the CSSF. Those efforts have been great. We did that for about 9 years, reached hundreds of thousands of people, but it was really a question mark for us on how sustainable and how do you scale this project. It would take us forever to work with these partners with the funding that we can provide and trying to bring in other funders to really get nationwide implementation. So with SAVE in about 2018, we brought all of that experience up to the Department of Education in the Philippines and to ask them, what is their vision on the Comprehensive Safe School Framework? They have it as a policy. Where are the biggest gaps for them and how could we collaborate between the 3 parties and bring in others to really look at a large-scale nationwide project? And that led us to leveraging innovation, technology, and collaboration, coming together to create a disaster risk reduction management information system. And that's now been developed with the central government. And it basically is it's providing an ecosystem that's connecting all 47,000 schools in the Philippines to allow a 2 flow of information fundamentally around the Comprehensive Safe School Framework and what its objectives are. So that's one aspect of really taking a school-by-school approach and then really working with the right actors to try and bring that at a national scale and national level. But in addition to that, we're also very proud, to partner with and support the efforts around the revision of the Comprehensive School Safety Framework, with the increasing, impacts of climate change we've just had here in Asia. The Philippines has just had 2 typhoons, 1 earthquake in the last 4 weeks, and that's going to continue throughout the coming future. An increase of global conflicts, what we've just learned in the COVID-19 pandemic, and the impact that has had in every country on school continuity. There's no better time to revise the framework to make it an all hazards, all risk approach to protecting children and education. And really that's providing governments with a practical framework that can be converted from, into policy and then working with the right actors to downstream it into a reality. As a foundation for us, a key objective when we're funding programs is really looking for viable solutions that address key issues and that can deliver impact and scale. So our journey on this particular avenue in the Safe Schools program has really delivered on that ambition. And so, we now have a global framework. It is relevant. It's been updated. It is relatively all-encompassing. We have a model example of a country that has looked to implement that in a certain capacity at a nationwide level. We are doing some research and reporting on the impact of that. So there really is an opportunity to showcase this, hopefully through today and other opportunities, to say, look, there is a great example of this being put into practice. It is possible. There are funders like ourselves who have been on this journey for 10 years, and we see the value 100% in doing this. And it does save lives. It is making disasters less disastrous. And hopefully it's not just disasters, as we've already covered. It's covering things like, biohazards, conflict, the COVID pandemics, epidemics, just to make society and schools better prepared so that children can have a better future.
Yes, it was turned off. Thank you so much, Mark, for your partnership and for being such a strong partner in this work, and also showing how the private sector can really play a fundamental role in shifting education systems, and also with a clear focus on climate change, and for everything else that you and the Prudence Foundation is doing on this area. We started a bit late, but it's soon time to wrap up. I will ask Mason to share any other reflections you might have, and then we will end by a very short recorded message from another young person. So Mason, over to you.
Children will be the most affected by climate change now and in the future. This is why child participation in climate action is very important, not just for me, but for all children around the world. We want to be heard and see our recommendations taken forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. I think we will hear from Maria Marshall, who is a climate activist and high school 8th grader, who has recorded a message for us about why action is needed to respond. I think that she will also reinforce some of the things that you've been sharing with us today, Mason. So if we can get the video. We don't have any audio, if that's. We will try once more and see if it works. If not, we will have to do without it. Yeah, okay. We are saying that, I mean, we all know, having lived through COVID and through hybrid meetings and hybrid events, that technology is not always on your side. So we started with a bit of a challenge, we ended with a bit of a challenge, but I'm super excited that we actually got Mark to be able to speak to us and all the participants online to be able to participate. And I want to thank all the speakers in the room, online, and all of you for participating in this event. I hope that you will, like we all have committed to do, continue to champion the really important correlation between education and the climate crisis, and make sure that we are taking the so desperately needed action to address the both and think about how we can join them up and be even more efficient. So thank you so much for participating today. Stay safe and take care. Bye, everyone online.